In the vastness of the Tibetan mountains, where silence converses with the clouds and the wind dances among the snow-capped peaks, lies a small temple that safeguards ancient secrets about the true nature of inner peace. It is in this sacred place that our story begins, not with grand revelations or extraordinary moments, but with the simplest and most powerful of acts: awakening. In a small hut on the outskirts of the temple, a young monk struggled each morning with his awakening. His mind was always a step ahead of his body, preoccupied with the day's tasks, anxious about expectations, lost between yesterday and tomorrow. He would rise after the sun, long after the other monks had begun their morning practices, carrying the weight of guilt for his constant tardiness. One particularly cold dawn, as the moon still embraced the sky and the stars whispered their final stories, the young monk was gently awakened by a soft touch on his shoulder. It was his master, a serene figure whose eyes held the depth of countless contemplated sunrises. "Come," the master said, his voice as soft as the breeze entering through the window. "I want to show you something that will change your life forever." Still drowsy and slightly confused, the young monk followed his master to a small plateau that offered a privileged view of the eastern horizon. The air was frigid, and his mind protested, longing for the comfort of his warm bed. But there was something about his master's silent presence that kept him there, expectant. "Watch," the master said, pointing to the darkness dissolving on the horizon. "The awakening of the day is not a single moment, but a delicate dance between light and darkness, just like our consciousness." As they observed, the young monk began to notice the subtle changes in the world around him. First, a gentle brightening on the horizon, so faint it might have gone unnoticed if he hadn't been fully present. Then came the first bird songs, as if rehearsing their voices for the grand concert of dawn. "See how nature awakens," the master continued. "There is no rush, no alarms, no violence. Each element awakens in its own time, in perfect harmony with the whole." The sky began to paint itself in shades of pink and orange, colors the young monk had never truly appreciated before. The clouds, which moments earlier were merely dark shadows, now danced in golden hues, as if touched by divine hands. The natural awakening of the body and mind follows the same rhythm as the sunrise, the master explained. When we force this process, we create internal conflict. When we flow with it, we find harmony. In the days that followed, the young monk began to adjust his rhythm to that of the sun. At first, it was a struggle. His body resisted, his mind complained. But gradually, he began to notice subtle changes. His sleep grew deeper, as if his body trusted the natural rhythm of awakening. He started to observe how his senses sharpened in the early hours of the day. The aroma of dew on the grass, the whisper of leaves in the wind, the precise temperature of the air on his skin, each sensation became a natural meditation, an invitation to full presence. The master taught him to create a simple ritual for this sacred moment of awakening. As soon as he opened his eyes, before even rising, he would take 3 conscious breaths. On the first, he acknowledged the gift of a new day. On the second, he felt gratitude for the rest he had received. On the third, he set his intention to remain present in every moment. Over the weeks, the young monk discovered that conscious awakening was not just about rising early. It was about awakening to life in its entirety. He noticed how his mind grew clearer during morning meditations, how his body responded better to exercises, and how his interactions with the other monks became more harmonious. "Awakening is our first practice of the day," the master said, "and perhaps the most important. For the way we awaken sets the tone for the entire day. When we awaken in harmony with the sun, we align ourselves with the rhythm of the universe." One morning, while watching the sunrise from his favorite spot on the plateau, the young monk realized he was no longer struggling with awakening. His body naturally aligned with the sun's rhythm, and his mind awakened as gently as daylight dissolves the night's darkness. Sitting there, with the first warmth of the sun touching his face, he understood that true awakening was not a destination to be reached, but a daily practice of renewal and reconnection with the deepest nature of his being. And so, as the sun completed its ascent in the sky, the young monk prepared for his next practice, carrying with him the serenity and clarity that only a conscious awakening could bring. The young monk, still seated on the plateau, felt the warmth of the sun on his face when his master approached silently, carrying 2 small meditation cushions. Without a word, the master placed one of the cushions beside the young monk and sat on the other, naturally assuming a meditative posture. The morning silence was unlike any other the young monk had ever experienced. It was not empty or dead. It was alive, vibrant, full of a presence he couldn't explain. The sounds of nature awakening created a subtle symphony. The rustling of leaves, the distant birdsong, the occasional hum of an insect. "The mind is like this plateau at dawn," the master said softly, breaking the silence. At first, it is covered by the mist of thoughts, but as the sun of awareness rises, clarity naturally emerges. The young monk tried to meditate, but his mind was as restless as ever. Thoughts of breakfast, his chores, the chill he felt, the discomfort in his legs. It was an endless torrent of distractions. "Do not fight your thoughts," the master instructed, as if he could sense the frustration on the young monk's face. "Observe them as we observe clouds in the sky. They pass, they change shape, they sometimes block the sun, but the sky remains unchanged." In the days that followed, the young monk began to develop a new relationship with his morning meditation practice. He learned that he didn't need to create artificial silence. The silence was already there, waiting to be discovered beneath the layers of thought. One particularly challenging morning, when his mind seemed especially unsettled, the master brought him a bowl of crystal clear water from the temple spring. "Watch," the master said, gently stirring the water. The surface became murky, making it impossible to see the bottom of the bowl. "This is your mind when it is stirred by thoughts," the master explained. "Now, watch what happens when we allow the water to rest." Gradually, the water settled. The suspended particles sank to the bottom, and the water's natural clarity emerged. The bottom of the bowl became visible, revealing even the smallest details of the patterns engraved inside. "Meditation is not about forcing the mind to calm down," the master continued. "It is about creating the conditions for the mind's natural clarity to emerge. Like this water, your mind has an inherently clear and tranquil nature. Our practice is simply to allow that nature to reveal itself." The young monk began to understand that the 15 minutes of meditation after sunrise were not merely a spiritual exercise. They were a gift he gave to himself, a moment to reconnect with his deepest nature. He learned to begin his practice with 3 deep, mindful breaths, anchoring himself in the present moment. He learned to feel the weight of his body on the cushion, notice the temperature of the air on his skin, and observe the natural rhythm of his breath. Over time, he started noticing patterns in his mind. Some days, his thoughts were like a raging storm. Other days, they were a gentle breeze. He learned not to judge these variations, not to create stories about being a good or bad meditator. Every meditation session is unique, his master taught, just as every sunrise is unique. Do not try to recreate past experiences or chase specific states. Simply be present with what is. One morning, while meditating, the young monk had a profound experience. For a brief moment, all his thoughts naturally stilled, like clouds dispersing to reveal a perfectly blue sky. There was no effort, no struggle, just crystalline clarity and deep peace. When he opened his eyes, he found his master smiling gently. "You have experienced your true nature," the master said. "But do not cling to this experience. The true practice is to return, moment by moment, to the simplicity of now." And so, sitting there on the plateau, with the sun now higher in the sky and the monastery beginning to stir with its daily activities, the young monk realized that morning meditation was not an exercise in controlling the mind, but an act of deep trust in the natural wisdom of his own mind. As the young monk sat quietly after his meditation, his stomach began to softly rumble. It was time for breakfast at the temple, the moment when all the monks gathered in the main hall for the first meal of the day. But before he could rise, his master gestured for him to remain seated. "Before we eat," said the master, "there is something essential I need to teach you about the nature of true happiness." The master then took out a small ceramic bowl from within his robes. It was old and simple, with a few small cracks along its surface. Though empty, the master held it as if it were the most precious of treasures. "What do you see?" the master asked, offering the bowl to the young monk. "An empty bowl, master," the young monk replied, a little confused. The master smiled gently. "Look more deeply. Is this bowl truly empty?" The young monk examined the bowl again, searching for something he might have missed in his first observation. Yet all he saw was an empty bowl, though now he noticed its cracks and imperfections more closely. "In this empty bowl," the master began, "is contained the entire story of gratitude. Look at its cracks. They tell us of past meals, of moments of sharing, of the impermanence of all things. Its emptiness speaks to the possibility of being filled again, of the abundance it has known and the abundance yet to come." The young monk began to realize that his master was teaching him something far beyond a simple lesson about a bowl. It was a lesson about how to see the world with different eyes. "Gratitude," the master continued, "is not a response to abundance. It is a practice that allows us to recognize the abundance that already exists, even when it seems like there is nothing there." In the days that followed, the master taught the young monk a special practice to cultivate active gratitude. Each morning, after meditation and before breakfast, they would sit together and practice what the master called the 3 recognitions. "First," the master explained, "we recognize something in nature that we are grateful for. It could be the sunrise we just witnessed, the air we breathe, or even the rain that falls." The young monk began to notice how this simple practice changed his perception of the natural world. Colors appeared more vivid, sounds more distinct, and every element of nature seemed to hold a beauty he had previously overlooked. "Second," the master continued, "we recognize someone in our life that we are grateful for. It could be someone we know, someone who has helped us in the past, or even someone who has challenged us to grow." This part of the practice touched the young monk's heart deeply. He began to realize how every person in his life, even those who had brought him difficulties, had contributed in some way to his growth. "And third," the master concluded, "we recognize something within ourselves that we are grateful for. It could be our health, our ability to learn, or simply our breath." This last part was often the most challenging for the young monk. Finding gratitude for himself required a kindness and acceptance that he was still learning to cultivate. One morning, as they practiced together, a strong storm approached. The wind blew fiercely, rain poured heavily, and the sky was dark with heavy clouds. "Master," the young monk asked, "how can we practice gratitude on a day like this, when everything seems so gloomy?" The master smiled and replied, "It is precisely on days like this that the practice of gratitude becomes most powerful. Look at the storm. It nourishes the earth, fills the rivers, and cleanses the air. Even what seems like adversity carries within it the seeds of abundance." Gradually, the young monk began to understand that gratitude was not merely a feeling, but a way of seeing the world. It was as if he were developing a new sensory organ, one that allowed him to perceive the richness and beauty present in every moment, even the simplest or most challenging ones. And so, each morning, before the sun climbed high in the sky, and before the activities of the day filled his mind, the young monk would sit in silence and practice his 3 recognitions. Over time, he realized that this practice was transforming not just his mornings, but his entire day, his entire life. The master's empty bowl became a powerful symbol in his practice, a reminder that gratitude does not depend on what we have or do not have, but on how we choose to see what is before us. After completing his gratitude practice, the young monk noticed his body was tense and stiff from the long period of sitting. His master, noticing his discomfort, gently stood up and gestured for him to follow into a small garden near the temple, where the grass was still damp with morning dew. "Observe that bamboo," said the master, pointing to a nearby grove. "See how it moves with the wind. It is strong, yet flexible. It never breaks. It simply dances with the forces of nature." The young monk watched as the long bamboo stalks bent gracefully with the morning breeze, swaying in a natural, fluid dance. Each stalk seemed to have its own choreography, yet all moved in perfect harmony. "Our bodies are like bamboo," the master continued. "When we move consciously, we find balance between strength and flexibility, between stability and fluidity." The master then began to demonstrate a series of slow, graceful movements resembling a meditative dance. His gestures flowed like water, each movement arising naturally from the previous one, with no clear beginning or end. "This is a gift passed down from master to disciple for countless generations," he explained. "It is a practice that unites body, breath, and mind in a sacred dance." In the days that followed, the master began teaching the young monk the fundamentals of mindful movement. They always started with the basic posture, feet rooted to the ground like an ancient tree, spine elongated like a silk thread suspended from the heavens, shoulders relaxed like drifting clouds. Before each movement, the master instructed, "Feel your breath. Let it guide your body, like the wind guides the leaves of a tree." The young monk found this practice to be very different from any physical exercises he had known. There was no rush, no goal to achieve, no perfect position to master. It was an invitation to explore the body as a sacred terrain, to uncover the wisdom contained in every movement. One particularly challenging morning, when the young monk struggled to find fluidity in his movements, the master brought him a small bird that had fallen from its nest. With infinite gentleness, the master held the bird in his hands. "Observe how I hold it," said the master. "If I grip it too tightly, I will hurt it. If I hold it too loosely, it will escape." Mindful movement requires the same balance, neither excessive tension nor complete abandonment. Gradually, the young monk began to understand that mindful movement was not merely a physical practice, but a form of meditation in motion. Each gesture became an opportunity for awakening, each posture an expression of full presence. He learned to feel the weight of his body shifting from one foot to the other, like water flowing between vessels. He discovered the subtle dance of muscles and tendons beneath his skin, the natural rhythm of his breath adjusting to each movement, the constant interplay between stability and motion. "The body is our first temple," the master said. "Every mindful movement is a prayer, every gesture an offering to the present moment." Over time, the young monk began to notice subtle changes in both his body and mind. His posture became naturally more upright, his movements more graceful, his breath deeper and more regular. But beyond the physical changes, a deeper transformation was taking place. One morning, as he practiced his movements in the garden, the young monk experienced a profound realization. For a moment, he completely lost the sense of separation between his body and the environment around him. It was as if he were dancing with the very air, moving in perfect harmony with the rhythm of life. "You have discovered the secret," said the master, who had been silently observing. "Mindful movement is not something we do, it is something we are. It is our deepest nature expressing itself through the body." And so, each morning, after his gratitude practice and before the sun rose high in the sky, the young monk devoted time to this sacred dance. Sometimes his movements were broad and flowing like a river. Other times small and subtle like the unfurling of a flower. He came to understand that every movement, no matter how small, contained the potential for awakening. A single mindful step could be as profound as hours of seated meditation. A single gesture performed with total presence could reveal truths that no sacred text could convey. After completing his sacred morning dance, the young monk felt his body vibrating with renewed energy. The sun was already higher in the sky, and the aroma of breakfast began to waft through the temple air. His master, who had observed his entire movement practice, now guided him toward the monastery's kitchen. "The first meal of the day," the master said as they walked, "is like the first snow falling on the mountain. It sets the tone for all the layers that will come afterward." In the temple kitchen, the master took 2 small clay pots and began preparing green tea in the traditional way. His movements were precise and deliberate, as though each gesture was part of an ancient sacred ritual. "Observe," the master instructed, placing a few tea leaves into each pot. "Before we nourish the body, we nourish the senses." The young monk watched as his master poured hot water over the tea leaves. The gentle aroma filled the air, and he could see the leaves dancing in the water, slowly unfolding like small lives awakening. "Many seek satisfaction by filling their plates," the master continued. "But true nourishment begins long before the first bite. It starts with an awareness of the emptiness that asks to be filled." The master then brought out a bowl of simple rice and some steamed vegetables. The meal was modest, yet there was something about the way it was presented that made it seem like a royal feast. "Before eating," the master said, "practice seeing your meal as though it were the first time, as if you had never seen rice before, as if each vegetable were a completely new discovery." The young monk looked at his bowl with fresh eyes. He noticed how each grain of rice reflected light differently, how the colors of the vegetables created a natural palette of greens and oranges, how the rising steam formed unique patterns in the air. "Now," the master continued, "before the first bite, pause. Breathe. Take in the aroma. Let your eyes feast first. Let your nose feast. Let your heart feast on the gratitude for this moment." The young monk followed the instructions, surprised by how many sensations he could experience before even tasting the food. It was as if each sense was awakening to a new form of nourishment. "When you finally take the food into your mouth," the master said, demonstrating with a small bite of rice, "let it rest on your tongue for a moment. Feel its temperature, its texture. Allow each flavor to reveal itself naturally." In the days that followed, the young monk began to develop a new relationship with his first meal of the day. He learned that eating could be a profound form of meditation, a practice of complete presence. One morning, when a strong storm delayed the arrival of supplies to the temple, breakfast consisted of just a small portion of plain rice. Some younger monks expressed their dissatisfaction, but the master saw an opportunity for an important lesson. "True nourishment," he explained, "does not lie in the quantity or variety of what we eat, but in the quality of our presence while eating. A single grain of rice, eaten with full awareness, can nourish more deeply than a feast consumed with a scattered mind." The young monk began to realize how his relationship with food reflected his relationship with life. When he ate hastily, his mind felt rushed throughout the day. When he ate distractedly, he found himself more easily distracted in his practices. "Every meal is an opportunity to awaken," the master said. "Each bite is a chance to practice the art of total presence." Over time, the young monk discovered that this practice was transforming not only his relationship with food, but with every aspect of his life. He began to notice how each experience, like each bite of food, had its own unique flavor, texture, and time to be savored. One morning, while quietly sipping his tea, the young monk had a profound realization. He understood that true nourishment wasn't just what entered his body, but also the sunlight touching his skin, the air he breathed, the sounds he heard, and the thoughts he nurtured. "You're beginning to understand," said the master, noticing his disciple's expression. "The entire universe is nourishing us in every moment. Our practice is simply to be present to receive this infinite nourishment." And so, each morning, the young monk practiced the art of mindful nourishment. Every meal became a sacred ceremony, every bite an opportunity to awaken to the abundance present in each moment. After finishing his mindful meal, the young monk and his master walked to the temple's main gate. The sun was now higher in the sky, and the other monks had begun their daily activities. However, before the young monk could join them, his master stopped him with a gentle gesture. "Before you begin your tasks," the master said, "there is one final practice essential to completing your morning awakening." The master then reached into his robes and pulled out a small bronze bell, ancient and weathered with time. "This bell," he explained, "belonged to the first master of this temple. He rang it every morning, not to mark time, but to awaken intention." With a delicate movement, the master struck the bell, and its crystalline sound echoed through the valley, creating ripples of vibration that seemed to touch something deep within the young monk's soul. "Each day is like a blank page in a sacred book," the master continued. "Intention is like the first word we write on that page. It sets the tone for the story that will unfold." The master then taught the young monk the practice of conscious intention. It wasn't a simple list of tasks or goals, but a profound moment of alignment with the greater purpose of his existence. "Close your eyes," the master instructed. "Feel the weight of your existence in this precise moment. Feel the privilege of being alive, of having another day to practice, to serve, to grow." In the days that followed, the young monk learned to set his daily intention as a sacred art. Each morning, after completing his other practices, he would pause at the temple gate for this final ritual. Intention, the master explained, is not about controlling the future, but about guiding the present. It's like an archer aiming an arrow. The target provides direction, but every moment of the arrow's journey matters just as much. One particularly challenging morning, when a series of unexpected events disrupted the temple's routine, the young monk discovered the true power of this practice. While others felt lost in the chaos, he remained centered, anchored by the intention he had set at dawn. "Do you see?" the master said, observing his serenity. "Intention is like an inner compass. When life's storms churn the waters, it keeps us on course." Over time, the young monk began to see how all 6 morning habits connected in a sacred dance. Conscious awakening opened the doors of perception, meditation clarified the mind, gratitude opened the heart, movement harmonized the body, nourishment sustained the being, and intention directed all this energy toward a meaningful purpose. One morning, as he gazed over the valley from the temple's heights, the young monk had a profound realization that changed his life forever. He understood that these 6 habits were not just isolated practices, but keys to awakening the natural wisdom present in all beings. "Master," he said, "I now see that we are not simply creating a morning routine. We are learning to truly awaken to life." The master smiled, his eyes glimmering with approval. "Yes," he replied. "Each morning is a small life, and each of these practices is an aspect of the Great Awakening. When we awaken consciously, meditate with clarity, cultivate gratitude, move with presence, nourish ourselves with care, and set intentions with wisdom, we are not merely beginning the day well, we are practicing the art of fully living." And so, our story comes to an end, though like all great truths, it lives on in every dawn, every mindful breath, every moment of full presence. For true awakening is not a destination to be reached, but a journey to be lived, moment by moment, day by day. It is not the habits themselves that transform our lives, but the awareness and presence we bring to each of them. Each morning is a new opportunity to awaken, not just to a new day, but to a new way of being.